We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. The White House has released its first official portrait of Melania Trump. It's been a hit online, but it's Melania's striking pose that has got everyone talking. It's strong, assertive, full of determination. I wonder what or who was her inspiration. It seems Boris is not the only Johnson who has influence in the White House. On today's show, Afua is worried about The Rock, Nick's going diesel, Rachel says dad's the word, and Greg says it's time for Labour MPs to jump ship. Now, talk about a storm in a teacup. I was blown away this week by the response to this exchange that David Moyes, Sunderland manager, had with a BBC sports journalist. Listen carefully.
No, none at all.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
We're just getting a wee bit naughty at the end there, so just watch yourself. You might get you still might get a slap even though you're a woman.
Well, I watched that clip and I thought little of it. Just a small bit of banter, albeit perhaps a silly comment to make. Nothing to see here, so I continued with my day. How wrong I was. Less than 24 hours after the clip emerged, the press and social media were having a field day at Mr. Moyes' expense. There seemed to be uproar, some demanding his sacking, or at the very least, some kind of punishment. There was talks of links to domestic violence and very loud cries of sexism. But here's the thing, there shouldn't have been any offence caused. Granted, his comments may have been silly, and on reflection, I'm sure he won't repeat them. But calls of sexism and condoning domestic violence are a step too far. It's time to stop trying to find offence where there really isn't any intended.
So, Michelle, I've been trying to work out why you think it's OK for somebody to make comments like this, even though they appear in jest. And I think the conclusion I've come to is that maybe you're not looking at it in context. Because if you take these remarks on their own, no context whatsoever, I can see what you're saying, you know, it sounded fairly light-hearted, she laughed at the time that he said them. But the context is, it's a male-dominated environment. There are few women journalists. Those that are there have repeatedly talked about the sexism that they face on a regular basis. And then there's broader context in society that women do face violence, that these casual threatening behaviours are something that a lot of women say they experience in the workplace. And often when you feel the impact of those kind of microaggressions, those seemingly harmless comments, you feel like you kind of have to laugh them off. You don't want to be the one shouting sexism. It's a burden that as a woman it's really difficult to carry. And just to finish my point, and I know others will want to come in as well, I think that's why it's really important for everybody else to step in and say when something's wrong, because it's not fair to expect a woman in that position who may feel insecure, she may feel that she stands out already being in such a male-dominated environment, that she might not want to be the one standing there yelling sexism. And we owe it to her, I think, when we see it, when we see the context, to say what it is.
Right, so let me respond before I bring someone else in. So what I would say is, I think it's you that's not seeing the context. I think if that stuff was written down, I'd be jumping all over it and saying it was horrendous and it was threatening. When you see it in the context, it was not a threat, and to take it as such, I think people are taking this as a threat. They're tuned into Offence FM. They're on the airwaves seeking offence. If you seek offence, you can find offence anywhere. I'm tuned into Equality FM. I want banter. I want people to feel relaxed around me and not treading on eggshells around me in case I don't think their joke's funny and I want to report them and create sexism. Sexism is terrible. Domestic violence is terrible. Both things need to be stamped out. But what we need to do is make sure that we're not trivialising those things by crying every single little thing as being sexism and stuff like that, because when you do, it undermines the real sexism and the real domestic violence.
I want to let everyone else come, but just quickly, you know, what about racism? Do you think it's different? It's not that long ago that people used to use racist terms in a laughing way, harmless racist jokes.
Hold on, don't take my topic. It's not about racism.
It's similar. It's the point remains.
I sincerely, as the former chairman of the FA, I sincerely hope the FA isn't going to spend hours wasting their time on this, because I think it would be. Look at actually what he said. Yeah. What he actually said was, you might you still might get a slap even though you're a woman. So in other words, you're saying if you were a bloke, you would have got a slap.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that sexist?
So you're taking that at face value and assuming you're assuming he would have said the same thing.
Well,
I know that's what he said.
I'm saying that's so what you're saying is we should interpret what he says to your point of view. What he was basically saying. I mean, I have a sympathy with football managers. I mean, they get so much aggression aimed at them, particularly someone like David Moyes when you're bottom of the league. You get so much aggression aimed at them. And we live in a world where football sells newspapers. And therefore, every day you've got to fill 10 pages about... And there's not 10 pages of stuff to fill it with. So trivial things get blown up into made important. And I have to say, I think this is trivial.
So David Moyes is a victim of zealous
I think he behaved properly. He realised he said something that he didn't think was right and he apologised.
By calling her a girl, by the way.
There was no complaint from
his apology was almost worse than the initial offence.
Nick, what do you think?
So dismissive.
I think so much of this rests on the view of the supposed victim who doesn't have a problem with it. Some people say she's laughing it off. She might be laughing nervously. I don't know about that. But the timeline is quite interesting because this happened 4 weeks ago. The young woman didn't want it aired. Sunderland didn't even. After he did it, he immediately phoned his chief executive and said, I think I've made a bit of a slip here. And he then phoned the BBC journalist to apologise, and it was all left to lie. Now, I love the fact that newspapers have got it. That's what newspapers are put on earth to do. Great. But if we now look in the... And I would say this, I think you do a terrible disservice to genuine victims of domestic violence, because to lump in a clumsy, I think you said clumsy, he shouldn't have said it, but there's no offence there, really. And to say that this speaks to the attitude towards women, no, it doesn't. He apologised, she accepted it. People who actually need help are not backed by people like you grandstanding this affair that actually means nothing. As Craig said, it doesn't amount to anything. And just quickly, as former chairman of the FA...
I'm side here because she's so outnumbered. Can I just talk about a bit more context? It was a 0-0 draw to Burnley. You can see why he was a bit browned off by having all these questions. Well, don't forget that Moyes had his boss in the stands. Yeah. And I think this is one of the keys to this. He felt slightly undermined by the fact that his boss was there judging him. And then this girl comes into this this inferno of testosterone, which is a male-dominated sport, a football ground in the post-match environment. And, of course, something like that was going to happen. It is trivial, Afua, I agree. But I think we have to look at the wider picture, which is that it sort of behoves men in positions of power in a male-dominated industry not to belittle or even verbally suggest violence to women.
Of the game.
I know, I agree it is, but I think there was a tiny problem, it was dealt with, and everyone moves on.
I mean, I think the idea, I agree, it's not the most serious example of sexism or threats of violence I've ever seen, of course. And the idea, Nick, that it's kind of mutually exclusive, that either I feel aggrieved by incidents like this or I back victims of domestic violence, is ridiculous. I'm not wrong.
Make it
I think the idea...
Just make it the moment of the pledge.
Hold on, blokes, what if it was your daughters being... Someone saying to your daughters... I think this your daughters, you'll get a slap. When they're in their place of work, what would you feel if it was your daughters?
He says you'll get a slap even though you're a woman. In other words, I give every reporter a slap.
Has he ever said that to a male reporter?
Well, Gary Lineker, I thought, actually said something quite interesting about it. He said it highlights a tendency for some managers to treat interviewers with disdain. I think that's perfectly fair, but it's nothing to do with sexism.
I think this is one of the most toxic ideas, that you can divide incidents into trivial and, as you said, real victims of domestic violence, real victims of sexism.
Well, I think you can.
The spectrum matters.
Can we not forget that Jeremy Clarkson actually lost his job at the Beeb for hitting a male producer? He is in a complete firestorm for even saying he might. There is, I think, a big difference in it.
But
you must agree that there is a difference in actual violence and it's suggested or implied.
But that doesn't mean that threats of violence are okay. And the fact that he said,
joking
even though you're a woman, for a woman who's conscious of being practically the only woman in the room, I think those kind of acts of othering don't help.
It wasn't a threat.
When I've experienced joking sexist comments in the workplace, which, by the way, I think it says 70% of people have, I haven't complained about it or made a fuss, because I felt I don't want to be the person, the woman in the room that's always complaining about
So
sexism.
what if it
That's
was
difficult
a
position to be
woman
in.
football boss, Karen Brady, saying to a rookie reporter, "You'll get a slap on the bum next time"?
I mean,
would that cause a sexist
If that
storm?
happened, I would like to have a debate about it. But as far as I know, it hasn't.
Well, it
linked
could
to
easily
the fact that this
happen.
is a very male-dominated
Right, can we
environment.
just
Look,
hear
if you
from him,
really
though?
want to
We
find
need
about
to-
sexism, and I mean, I could give you so many better examples than this of sexism in
hold on.
football. Not this one.
I'm sure there are
Because we
legion.
need to let him say his apology. So let's just hear what he actually said.
It was in the heat of the moment, and I deeply regret the comments I made. It's certainly not the person who I am, and I accept it was a mistake. I spoke to the BBC reporter, who accepted my apology, and hopefully we all move on.
I just think, to me, he's sitting there.
He's a broken man.
Yeah, but it's also like, I did a debate with this with a girl that told me that she was demoralised and demotivated because a guy at work had asked her to get the teas in at a break in a meeting. And I responded to that and said, I've worked in IT, I've always been the only girl. When people say to me, oh, you're getting the teas in, I'll turn around and go, yeah, sure, do you want me to do your ironing whilst I'm there at the same time? If you don't mind, if you're getting a drink, I'll have tea, one sugar, end of story, have a bit of a laugh, move on with my day.
I think
Doesn't it bother me?
I personally think that we're conflating two things, which is I think we've all experienced banter, things that maybe are inappropriate, we've brushed it off and got on with it and been resilient. But that's not to say that we should condone it as behaviour. The way we make progress is calling out things
nobody is
that are wrong.
condoning it.
I'm not saying he should necessarily
He's
be
not
sacked,
condoning-
by the way.
Oh, thank God
I
for
think
that.
it's-
Oh, so-
no
but he
one
might
asked
be.
me.
He
No one
might
asked
be.
me. No, I think it's good that he apologised. I think that we should take these things seriously. If we listen to you, Michelle, he shouldn't even need to apologise because you don't even think
I
there's
don't think
anything
he
wrong
should.
with
No,
it.
I don't. What I would say is, I don't think he did anything wrong. Fine. If you want to say if someone took offence, then I apologise for that. Then that's fine. I just think when you keep saying sexism, 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 then to me, I just think you tune out. So when there's like a genuine sexism thing, you pick up the paper and you go, oh God, not another sexism thing, because it's there all the time. And when you keep, like I said, seeking offence, you will find offence if you're proactively seeking it. And I just think stop proactively seeking offence where there is not intended.
Do you think I get out of bed in the morning?
Yeah.
Like, look,
Yeah.
I can't wait to find
I
out.
I think some days
Yeah,
maybe that's
I
true.
would love to never see any. Nothing would make me happy.
I mean, I know David Moyes. I've met him a couple of times. I think, and he says that's not me. He's a decent,
it was right
he's
for
a
him to
decent,
apologise.
likeable bloke
Great.
who says he thinks he said the wrong thing and he phoned up and apologised. The BBC haven't complained. The reporter haven't complained.
That is what
It's just
is so
pages
surreal
and
about this
pages.
debate.
It's
No, that's
pages
what's
and
surreal
pages
about
of
this
sports
debate.
news.
It's good that he apologised. We wouldn't agree that it's good he apologised if he hadn't done anything wrong.
You got this
I just, what is wrong with you?
Just do it. You know you want to. Do it. It's empowering.
No way.
My final point on it is I think that also people just jump on this bandwagon because somehow it makes them feel like they're a better person by championing someone that they regard as a victim that they don't regard themselves as a victim by standing here and going, I'm politically correct, I'm politically correct. I think it's virtue signalling and I think people do it in order to make themselves feel like a better person.
But I love arguing with Michelle so much that I'm going to move on to my topic so that we can continue. I knew that one of the costs of Brexit would be the loss of a union that, born after the horrors of the Second World War, has allowed us all to benefit from peace in Europe. What I could not, in my wildest nightmares, have imagined is that within 1 week of formally triggering the process to leave the EU, there would already be talk of going to war with another European nation. But the ink was not even dry on Theresa May's Article 50 letter before a row broke out after draft EU negotiating demands gave Spain a veto over Gibraltar's future. Next thing you know, senior Tories are invoking the memory of the Falklands to suggest defending the rock by military force. It's one of Brexit's greatest ironies that the supposedly patriotic right wing of British politics, yes, I'm looking at you, Nick, has done more to undermine the territorial integrity of the UK than any other group. Scotland wants a new referendum. Gibraltar's economy, dependent as it is on Spanish labour, goods and trade, is inevitably under threat. As if that's not bad enough, these battle cries are a horrific reminder of exactly what future we are creating.
Good grief. At the risk of sounding patronising and sexist, calm down, dear.
Oh, here we
I
go.
think that this is utterly hysterical.
I'll tell you
think
what's hysterical. This is hysterical, Michelle. Next time, send an armada. I don't know how you can say I'm the one being hysterical.
Right,
Anyway, I'll let you continue.
I am not looking forward to the next 2 years when people like you are going to be jumping on every single little thing and blowing it out of proportion. The person that was talking about war, Michael Howard, which is I think what you're referring to, he's a former politician. He's a former leader. It's nothing to do with him. He's making comments. It's not somebody in a senior position of responsibility
he
saying,
holds the whip in
I'm
the
going.
Lords, Michelle.
Yeah, but he's not speaking.
Since
Yeah, but
we're
he's
talking
not
about
speaking.
Howard, let's just hear what he said about Gibraltar.
35 years ago this week, another woman Prime Minister sent a task force halfway across the world to defend the freedom of another small group of British people against another Spanish-speaking country. And I'm absolutely certain that our current Prime Minister will show the same resolve in standing by the people of Gibraltar.
I don't think that's a small thing.
I do. I think this is not Theresa May saying we're going to war. We're not going to war over Gibraltar. It's not going to happen. And I just want everyone to calm down because it's a negotiation. People are going to be saying, I want this and I want this. And everyone's just getting hysterical. Everyone just calm down.
You know what? I mean, it's interesting you're telling me to calm down. I've been perfectly calm. I think if you look at the Daily Mail, we had comparative tables of the strength of our Navy, who would win the war against Spain, genuinely. And if I'm not from Gibraltar, but if I was, I think I would find you telling me to calm down offensive because they predicted this would happen.
If you're from Gibraltar and you want to talk about newspapers, they could have this. Where is it? They can have this in their window if they want. They could show their feelings. You get free posters and newspapers and everything at the moment.
It's kind of making my point.
Exactly.
It's making my point. It's not a small
Calm down.
thing. No, they're facing a serious threat to their economy and their future if we continue this belligerence. And the point is they foresaw this. They should have been into the Article 50 letter. The careless way that we've been proceeding with leaving the EU just shows we haven't thought through the full consequences. I'm not somebody to get excited about our overseas territories, but I respect the fact that the people in Gibraltar want to be part of Britain. Why are we not taking that seriously? And why are we threatening war?
My last point, and then I'll move on. You say that Gibraltar should have been mentioned in that letter. I saw the top guy in Gibraltar at the weekend talking, and he was saying he was comfortable. He'd been in contact with Theresa May. They knew they weren't going to be pulled out in that letter. They were comfortable with it. They didn't have a problem with it.
Greg?
I think this is a massive exaggeration. I think this is Michael Howard turned. I think he must have had a very long lunch, but Michael Howard turned this into a big story, and it wasn't one. In truth, it isn't.
He wasn't the only one, by the way.
No, but he did, and suddenly by saying this is like the Falklands, I mean, it was ridiculous. In fact, my favourite. Having listened to quite a lot of the stuff about this, my favourite quote was Lord West. Now, Lord West used to be head of the Navy, and he told the story of how they'd invaded Spain by mistake. That actually a bunch of Marines went up the wrong beach. Instead of going on to Gibraltar, they went into Spain. And he was the head of the Navy, and he had to phone the Spanish and apologise. And they only knew they got the wrong beach because the guy who ran the bar told them that he ought to be next door. That this is, and I just think that's the sort of triviality that the whole thing is about. It's a funny story. I mean, there's clearly an issue about Gibraltar, and it'll come running. But does anyone here genuinely believe we're going to go to war over Gibraltar?
No, I don't.
So let's
just
get one thing out there. Just so, Lord Howard, clearly there was something of the might about him when it comes to military there. He was actually speaking at 10 a.m. But one point I want to get over, so I think not. I think he was just trying to be clever with the gag about the Falklands. The gag didn't work, and I think you're probably setting too much thought to it. Just quickly, so you think it's all beaten up by British newspapers, do you? You don't think it's perhaps the other side around? You don't think perhaps if you study Spanish newspapers, how they're... Well, I'm here to help you. Let's listen to the words. Let's listen to the words of Fabienne Picardo, who's the Gibraltar First Minister.
Spain has been cock-a-hoop over this issue, and the Spanish media are the ones who have been playing it large. The front page of right-wing newspaper ABC was a photograph of Gibraltar with the Commission on one side and Spain on the other, carving it up because they thought they'd made such massive inroads in respect of their claim. So this we mustn't be allowing Spain to suggest is just an issue that has arisen in the UK media.
So perhaps we can now hear you having a go at the Spanish media as well, and that clearly they had no post-Brexit plan, or the EU had no post-Brexit plan because of their irresponsible headlines. I'll hear you condemn them as well.
I'm wondering if you misunderstand my point. I think that confirms my point.
You'll condemn those headlines as well?
Of course.
So you condemn us, right? Okay.
Of course.
So it's not just
This isn't me saying that I think that we should hand Gibraltar over to Spain.
So it's not just the British media, it's an incredibly thorny issue.
I agree.
And would you also
agree?
Also agree, and then I must yield, of course, when we see that there have been something like, since up to October the 31st of last year, 400+ times that Spanish naval vessels have sailed into Gibraltar waters. Don't you think this is quite ongoing? It's not suddenly emerged in the last 5 days?
Completely.
Okay.
The whole issue to me is a reminder of the fact that we are integrated with the European continent in many complex ways. Leaving is not going to be a simple thing. We should be taking it seriously. And one thing that we've benefited from as being part of the European Union is a level of security, peace and stability that we now might lose if we don't handle this carefully.
We're never going to go to
I'm
war.
not saying... Can I just make a few points? I used to work, and I wrote, when I was in the Foreign Office, a paper called The Dependent Territories. This has been... I tried to...
It's not in your column in the Mail on Sunday.
I also wrote one called Blue Passports in 1992 about why we should placate the hard right wing of the Tory party by offering a return to blue passports, which is one of the few advantages so far of Brexit. We're going to get our navy blue passports back. Yes. But what I think Af was saying is we're seeing unintended geopolitical consequences of the vote to leave the EU. And as a result of the Tory government's desire to placate the hard right, which is quite happy with a hard Brexit, we could see the dissolution of quite a lot that we previously was a stable United Kingdom, which had integrated within it Gibraltar, the Falklands, and so on. Well, we're going to possibly lose Northern Ireland. We could have to hand it over to Spain. I promise you. Do you think the Foreign Office really, really cares that much about 30,000 Gibraltarian Brits on the rock? No, I'm not saying anything.
Is there something you want to share?
It's not top priority, Nick. Take it from me.
No, but the Foreign Office has always believed in self-determination. So
the Gibraltarians voted to remain British, 96%.
Yes, and they'll get another vote, and they'll vote to remain British again. And then I think Britain has an obligation to those people.
But I think Af was bang on this. I mean, who knew when we voted to leave the EU that we were going to break up the union like this and possibly break up our dominions overseas as well? Come on, we knew what we were voting to leave, but we didn't know what we were getting into, and I think that was absolutely right.
I think that the kind of mainstream narrative during the referendum was we are an island, we have no border with Europe, and places like Gibraltar, which of course have a land border with Europe, and Northern Ireland, which has a land border with Europe, have kind of been overlooked, and now reality is coming to bite, and I don't feel that this was part of the debate when the referendum campaign was undergoing, and it doesn't really feel like it was properly thought through, because as the Chief Minister of Gibraltar said, whose clip you just introduced, he warned the Commons that this would happen, that the day after the Article 50 letter, Spain would start redemanding sovereignty over Gibraltar. And it's exactly playing out as he said, and nobody seems to have taken it seriously. And I just wonder why.
Anyway, we must move on. Boys need disciplining by schools and parents. They need it, and what is more, they can take it. No, not a line from Tom Brown's School Days, where older boys roasted younger ones on open fires in the Victorian era, though it does sound like one. It's former Harrow headmaster Barnaby Lennon, who says that this generation of fathers has gone soft. He's right that over the last 50 years there has been a transfer of authority from parent to child, and it's the kids who wear the trousers now. Lennon says the shift is having severe consequences for boys who are becoming rude, sloppy and unmotivated. They're doomed to perform worse than women as a result of a lack of structure, rules and discipline in their upbringing and education. I agree, this is a problem, even though my father could never say no to any of his 6 children about anything. He would only ever say, could easily. I'm not saying spare the rod, spoil the child, but dads have to stop being their boys' best friends, leaving it all to mum, and start being old-fashioned fathers again. You paters on the panel?
You and your Latin, Rachel. Can I just say to you, confuto gloriam. I've got you, haven't I?
Confuto?
Yes, stop boasting, stop showing off. And paters, by the way, for those who don't know, means dads.
Dads, fathers.
What is it that a dad should be giving off to their sons.
A sense of authority that he wears the trousers. He hasn't ceded this authority to the children who just determine everything that goes on in the family.
Where I think you're right, and the most fascinating piece out of Barnaby Lennon's book was that too many dads want to get on PlayStations or whatever they're called now. I don't know what the things are called now. PS3s, 4s, 5s. I don't know what number we are, and they're not doing. And the incredible thing is, he wrote, and I'm sure you saw this, that as a result of that, for the first time since the end of the First World War, well-educated women will have to marry less educated blokes because it's the only way they're going to keep the species going, which I thought was a really, really chilling fact.
Before we move on, can we just see a clip of of two different sorts of fathers? We've got the classic stern paterfamilias in Sound of Music.
Oh, she's at
and
it again.
Then we've got the cringy...
Nil desperandum, she will stop.
The cringy modern dad in Modern Family. So let's have a look.
As I sound your signals, you will step forward and give your name. You, Fräulein, will listen carefully. Learn their signals so that you can call them when you want them.
Lisa. Friedrich. Luisa. Kurt. Brigitte. Martha.
I'm the cool dad. That's my thing. I'm hip. I surf the web. I text. LOL. Laugh out loud. OMG. Oh my God. WTF. Why the face? You know, I know all the dances to High School Musical, so.
We're all in this together. Yes, we are. We're all stars. That means something, you know it.
I think what we see, Greg, is that children actually quite want to have a father who does it the old-fashioned way at times, and it's a bit cringy. They're hiding their faces, weren't they?
Well, I haven't read Mr. Lennon's book, but I am influenced by the fact that he was the head teacher at Harrow, so the breadth of people he's dealt with is quite small, isn't it? He's talking about a certain class structure and a certain, I suspect, a certain number of people.
He's not writing about Harrovians, but carry on.
No, well, no.
You know, if you'd said that about the head teacher of, I don't know, Salford Comp or whatever, you would have been quite right. But you can say it about head teachers of posh schools because you can dump all over posh schools as much as you bloody well like. No,
as I say, I haven't read the book, and if I don't know what his academic base is, so I've got to. So I'll concede that.
Okay, fair enough.
That it might be based on some sort of serious academic work as opposed to just his impression of meeting boys at Harrow over the years. I don't agree with the basic concept. I think, I was brought up by a dad who we all loved, who was the least likely person to discipline us in my whole life. I mean, my mother used to say, you wait till your father comes home, and my brothers and I used to roll around laughing because he was just a wonderful man, and he'd come in and he'd say, your mother tells me you've been misbehaving, and he used to go, and he'd laugh and we'd laugh, and that was. And yet
you're picking up something.
He was a wonderful man.
In my cue, which is actually, we are now expecting mothers to be mothers and fathers.
Well, there are many more single parents these days, so therefore.
And they're mainly 87% of single parents are female.
Are female, so therefore many kids are being brought up without a male figure, which I suspect.
Which is a problem.
Why
aren't men picking up the slack?
But I think I'm the friend of my two sons, as well as I think also...
That's because they're adults. We're talking about...
No, but when they were growing up,
younger.
I think I was a friend of them, but I think I was also a figure they would ask and a figure who would help. But I think you can be both. And the idea that you go back to that authoritarian father, I just don't agree with it at all. I think a lot of kids were screwed up by that exact relationship.
I think, Michelle, you're going to... I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this, because I know you had a particular relationship or non-relationship with your own father.
Yes, my relationship with my father was pretty disastrous, to say the least. And I just think that has an effect on girls as well. So I'm quite interested in see why is it just boys, because I think all children need boundaries, discipline. I'm not a mum yet, but I am an auntie and a godmum, and there's no messing around with me. All of my nieces and nephews, they know where they stand. We have fun, but then there's boundaries, there's rules. I won't mess about with them, and that's my kind of parenting style. And I think personally, for me, that's the right one.
Afua, do you think there are good role models for children? And would you regard your husband as a good father?
I think, he is a good father. And I think, for me, I find this whole debate a bit regressive, to be honest, because I totally agree. I agree with what Michelle said. I agree with you all. I think boundaries are important in parenting, and I see examples of parenting where it's all kind of best-friendly, where I think kids are dying for some stability and boundaries. On the other hand, I think in this country we have a history of being far too formal with our children. Just 50, 60 years ago, books advising children to shake hands with parents to shake hands with their children before bedtime. You know, I think we've become more emotionally intelligent because we've become more relaxed and friendly as parents. The reason I find this debate a bit regressive is that I think gender roles are changing in relationships. So, you know, men are taking more parental leave now. Women are working. I think it's important for children to have somebody who is quite more authoritarian and sets boundaries, but it doesn't have to be the father. I know examples of families where actually the mum is the more disciplinarian one and the dad is the more playful one. I think as long as children need two parents, ideally. It really helps children. All the evidence shows it helps children to have two parents. There are a lot of children who don't have two parents, and that can cause problems. And I think the ideal is to have two parents, and that one of those parents needs to be strong in setting boundaries. But I don't think it necessarily has to be the father. And, you know, the point that you made, Nick, I mean, I have a problem with that he said in the book, Lennon, about how disastrous it is that women are going to have to take husbands who are less educated.
Disastrous, but he highlighted the problem.
Yeah. I mean, this idea that it's kind of men's divine purpose to be more educated than women and for women to have a husband.
We're going off topic.
It doesn't
I don't think you're looking reality in the face, which is that men are not taking paternity leave. And British women do more housework and childcare by a country mile than any other European nation. We're way down the list in terms of sharing household responsibilities, which means that men are sort of selling the past, both on childcare and on housework. Anyway.
No, but when you come back to the education, I mean, I find that, like you, I find it a strange thing. I mean, the big change of universities in the last 50 years is that the girls now go along with their brothers, basically, whereas they didn't. You know, I remember going up to, I was going out with a girl at Cambridge, and you went to Cambridge, and it was 8 men to 1 woman in those days. Well, it's not anymore. It all changed.
Those were the days.
And the real difference is, yes, exactly. It depends who you were. What's really changed is that many more women are getting properly educated, getting decent jobs, and that's changing society. And it can only be
I want
well.
to go back to this whole business of dads being best friends and broing out with their teenage
and I think
boys.
I mean, you're right, that's one change. The other change is and I think you touched on this, Afua, is the incredible number of single parents now who are doing a fantastic job, whether they're men or whether they're women, and that's a massive dynamic. But look, I I was blessed. I had the most tremendous dad. I still miss him to this day. I was relatively young when he died. I think I was about 22. And if I've managed to impart a quarter of what I learnt from my father to my 2 sons, I will have done extremely well. But I do think, and you're going to hate this because it's old-fashioned, but I do think it's healthy for boys to see, providing the dad is in work and providing they're not in lone parents and taking all that on board, a dad who gets up, who goes to work, who is respectful around his wife, the mother or his wife, who makes sure that the children are nice when grandparents come along, they always speak respectfully, they make sure they wash the car and they get 50p for it, whatever it might be. Those are the sort of roles, and I know I'm now from the 1950s Daily Mail, but that is the role that I think the dad should be doing.
I agree with you, and I want to actually pay tribute to my own dad, who never said no, but just managed to transmit a nice, generous feeling of calm, you know?
Yeah. That's the sort of father mine was. Exactly
I've got to add my dad in, because everyone... my dad was not the disciplinarian one. My dad's lovely, and he, you know... I think
you can be lovely
but hands up, he was around the disciplinarian. I'm sort of proving my point. Your dad wasn't.
Came out fine.
My dad wasn't.
You can be a disciplinarian and love genuinely.
My dad wasn't a disciplinarian, and I certainly wasn't, right?
There we go.
As a father.
I proved my point.
You've all descended with a tribute to your dads. I can't do that. So instead, all I'll end with is saying, if I have to marry someone that's less educated than me, God help me.
I'm not sure you'll find them.
I know, that's what I mean. I know.
After I'll get on again. Here we go.
Listen, from that I better move on. It's me next panel, and I'm pledging to make the first donation to Labour 2017. British democracy is in trouble. We have a government which is making mistakes and needs to be challenged, and an official opposition which is a waste of space, led by a man who is a joke figure, supported by a shadow cabinet largely made up of no-hopers. Currently, Labour is some 18 points behind the Tories in the polls, with no sign of this changing. So why aren't Labour MPs who are disillusioned with Jeremy Corbyn doing something about this? Now is the time for action. Time to show some guts. Time for the majority of Labour MPs to abandon the sinking ship that is HMS Corbyn. They must put their survival and our democracy first. Launch the lifeboat and set up a new party, Labour 2017. They know Jeremy Corbyn is hopeless. They know that if enough of them move together, they could become the official opposition. They know they could elect their own leader, and they know they could then start doing what oppositions are supposed to do. So what are they waiting for? If they don't do something, many of them are going to lose their seats anyway. It's time for them to be brave and for us to be rid of Jeremy Corbyn.
There's been a lot of talk about how we need a new centre-ground party, but I think, from what I understand, you're saying something else, because we've seen with the SDP and the fact that they haven't had a resurgence of the Liberal Dems, that isn't working. The problem we have is that no MPs so far have shown any signs in wanting to detach from the Labour brand. There isn't going to be an internal push from within the PLP when, as we saw, Ed Miliband allowed the election of the Labour leader to become a party membership issue. You've got to completely tear all that up and start again. Why don't we go back to your other idea, Greg, which is to, instead of relying on Labour, who are in complete disarray, to provide proper opposition, why don't you throw your undoubted weight and influence behind the emergence of a new centre-ground party, which we've talked about before, a progressive alliance, the European Democrats, call it what you will, because at the moment, the Labour Party can't pull a skin off the rice pudding, let alone reinvent itself as a proper opposition.
No, but if you've got 150 Labour MPs who just said...
But you're not going to get them.
Well, you might. You might. They're all sitting at the moment waiting because they all think Corbyn is going to go anyway. Now, actually, I don't think Corbyn will go.
I don't think he will.
And I don't think he'll go because they're not going to be able to change the rules that says you've got to get 15% of MPs to support to get on the ballot paper for a new leader. So the left wouldn't get on the lead. Only Corbyn will get on that ballot paper because he's the incumbent. So I think at some stage in the next few months they're going to have to say, look, he's not going, we've got to do something, because we're going to get decimated otherwise. They are going to be wiped out. But secondly, much more important than that, we need an opposition. I mean, who are the best opposition? The Liberals do a bit.
The Lords.
The
Lords are doing something.
The Lords do a bit. The Scottish Nats are quite good at some of it. But, I mean, we desperately need an opposition.
In a way.
Now, if 150 of them, said 150 of them said, right, we're out. We're now a new party. We're Labour 2017. Actually, I believe that would end up being the Labour Party.
Who's going to lead them?
Let me just, it's important that we just look at a little bit. We talk a bit about democracy and where the new Labour Party is going. And I've got a question for you in a moment, Greg. But first, this is John McDonnell speaking at the inaugural Momentum Conference.
We've got to engender now in the Labour Party a new spirit of solidarity. I don't want leadership elections to be perennial affairs. We've elected a leader. We've elected him twice. We expect loyalty to that principle of democracy, not to the individual, but to the principle of democracy. And I believe actually the vast majority of Labour Party members, and yes, members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, agree with us.
Now, I'm no cheerleader, I assure you, for John McDonnell, but there is a question of loyalty. And here's the other thing. I'm amazed because, as we see, and you're right, by the way, Greg, Corbyn and the party does seem to disintegrate. They had really pretty poor showings at the last by-elections. In Richmond, they lost their deposit. I think the next month's council election is going to be ugly. But there is still a hardcore of people who ring my radio show and basically say the following. Corbyn is still much more true Labour than Tony Blair or any of his people ever were. And typically they'll be from Hull, they'll be from Sunderland, they'll be from Leeds, there'll be these massive sleepers. What are you going to do? You're going to lose that vote?
Well, the problem you've got with Corbyn is that he's not a good leader. Forget about where his politics...
But he's closer to
coming
Labour,
from the left.
Isn't he? True Labour than Blair ever. I know Blair was your best
No,
mate.
but that's about whether you think he's a leader I can believe his politics. He can say, I'm on the left and I believe that. But actually, the real problem is they haven't got a leader.
But Greg, genuine Labour voters, and again, I'm not being disparaging when I say because there probably are more in the north than they are down here, they feel closer to Labour under Corbyn than they ever did under Blair.
But that's no good if you're not going to win.
I know, when you don't get power.
That's no good if you're not going to get power. And that's no good if you can't oppose. Look, I've got an interesting clip of Corbyn after the PLP meeting, the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, where he got booed by his own MPs. He said this.
Sometimes spirits in the Labour Party can run high. Today has been one of those days. That's because we're a passionate party. So I want to send a message to all party members. I want to make it absolutely clear. Members are an asset. As a party, we must do more to involve and empower them.
Well, I mean, what's interesting there is he doesn't talk about voters. He doesn't talk about MPs. He talks only about members. Why? Because the members, or a disproportionate number of them, have supported him twice. Whether they'd support him a third time, I have doubts.
I want to say I really like Jeremy Corbyn. As a backbencher, I completely believed in him. As a politician, as a person, I think he's a person of principle. He does espouse the views of a lot of Labour members. But I completely agree with you, Greg. I think he's lost it. I think anecdotally from Momentum members that I speak to, young Labour supporters who were super excited about Corbyn, they have completely lost hope in him.
Greg, coming back to the idea of the ones who need to leave, the 100, 150, if next month is a wipeout, or it probably is as ugly as many people think it might be, could that be the tipping point in your view? They still won't summon up the courage?
I don't think anything will happen before the party conference. There'll be attempts to change the constitution of the party conference, and I suspect that won't be changed.
So in a year's time, where's the Labour Party in a year's time?
I don't know. They could be where they are now, in which case they're heading for disaster.
I just want to understand what you are advocating. Do you think that these Labour MPs should break away, form a new party as a way, just as a strategic way of getting Labour back on point?
If 150 of them broke away, they would. Sorry, if 150 of them broke away, they would become the official opposition. Now they've got problems with their own local parties, but I suspect less than they think.
What party would they be?
They would be Labour 2017.
What is that?
Is that a new party?
Two questions.
Yes.
Right. One, wouldn't it be simpler for the Labour Party to have some mechanism, as the Tories do? They're brilliant at defenestrating their leaders.
yes.
Of getting rid of Corbyn, one, i.e. change somehow that's the system of electing and deselecting your leader. And two, 150 MPs is an enormous number. It's the majority, because so they would become the opposition. Who do you see leading?
Well, I think you've got to say short-term and long-term. I'm not sure. They could. There are some good people in the Labour Party who could lead it. Personally, I'd say I'd persuade someone like Hilary Benn to do it, because I think you need a degree of stability. You need someone who is respected, who could who could sort the party out. I mean, basically, you need someone who knows how to lead.
There's no democracy here. I am in charge. Panel, stop idling. It's my turn next, and I'm going to be explaining why these three took us all for a ride. Motorists had to take it up the tailpipe from the government again this week. Their crime? They were stupid enough to listen to and act on advice given by, yes, you've guessed it, a government from a few years back, and buy diesel vehicles. Back then, around 17 years ago, we were all told to go diesel for the sake of the planet. Although, when you consider the prime cheerleaders were dumb, dumber and dumbest, otherwise known as John Prescott, Gordon Brown and Neil Kinnock, we all really should have known better. Now, admit to running a diesel car and you appear like a cross between Hannibal Lecter and Pol Pot. Accordingly, cities and towns the width and breadth of the land are getting ready to levy toxic taxes. Indeed, soon it will cost £24 to take your car into London. Theresa May was right to step in and say she wants to help those of us who've been duped over diesel. But how come the assorted bunch of idiots and failures who advocated this lunacy get knighthoods and fat pensions, and the motorists just get the bill?
No, you should really be looking at the scientists, because the scientists at the time offered that advice and were clearly wrong. But you're not saying we shouldn't do something,
No,
are
I'm not.
you? I mean,
No, I'm not.
clearly. I mean, there's a good clip from the Mayor of London who I think said it absolutely clearly.
There are children in London whose lungs are defective because of the poor quality air. More than 430 schools are in areas where the areas are illegal. There are adults who've got all sorts of health problems, from asthma to lung defects, suffer heart attacks and strokes because of the poor quality air. So look, there's no alternative. More than 40,000 deaths early across the country, more than 9,000 deaths across London early because of the poor quality air. No action is no longer an option.
I mean, my view is that actually we need to be more radical than we are. And that actually we need to say, I think it's time to be saying, 10 years' time, we're going to have 5 years' time, probably no diesel. 10 years' time, we're not going to have petrol cars in London. And actually, if you give people 10 years' notice, they'll be able to do those things. Some cities are doing that. Now, I remember the discussion, exactly the same discussion about lead in petrol. I made a programme about it, and everybody was saying, on your side, that sort of fairly right-wing position, oh no, you're entitled to keep lead in petrol. Actually, we in the end banned lead in petrol because we knew it was dangerous. It's the same now. Therefore, at some stage, the vast bulk of the people who go into London or go into big cities every day do not drive in. They go by other means of transport. Yes. Therefore, we should protect them.
Your political skills have deftly moved me away from the point, or moved the argument away. Of course we need to do something about air quality. What I find wholly wrong is that people who were persuaded to buy diesel cars, and you're right to point to the professor, again, he got a knighthood out of it, so he's now Professor, and Sir David King, who has admitted that now the science is in, actually they were probably misinformed, and he expresses regret, which is fair enough. But people went out and bought diesel cars because they thought, and now they are the ones who, and it's not just London, it's important we talk about London, £24, but literally the width and breadth of the country, from Norwich down to Plymouth and up to cities in the north, they're all going to have to pay because they followed government advice. So we need a scrappage scheme. I'm sorry, guys, we're going to have to help people who were duped to get rid of their cars.
I agree with that. I don't think a scrappage scheme is a problem. I think as long as we've got a plan, but I think we need a more radical plan, which some cities are doing across Europe. We need to say, look, in 15 years' time, this will all be gone.
How does the plumber in his van get the tools in?
Can I just get the facts in? Because it is important. It is important to look at the facts because they're pretty serious. So as we heard Sadiq Khan saying, 40,000 deaths a year due to air pollution across the UK. And the cost of air pollution to the economy, £20 billion a year. This is major. Imagine if 40,000 people a year were dying from terrorism. Imagine how radical we would be getting. It's serious. People are actually dying, Nick.
Were you tuned out a minute ago?
No.
I just said something has to be done. This is the injustice I'm railing at.
I have a diesel car, I'm ashamed to say. I'm one of the dumber and dumbest.
No, you were. It was the politicians who...
Well, we fell for it. We bought a diesel car, not realising. And I feel terrible driving it now because I also have a child.
Don't tell me you do.
No, I do.
Could you keep away from that?
We're all suffering from it. It's toxic, I mean, we all suffer one way or another, even if we don't know it. So I think we do need to get pretty radical. But I agree with you as well. I mean, I would like it to be a lot easier to buy clean cars. It's super expensive to buy electric cars at the moment. Technology is not affordable. And instead of penalising people for driving the diesel cars they bought, we should be helping them to get cars that are cleaner. So I agree with you about that.
But it won't be in 10 years' time, you see. So what you've got to do is and you may have to subsidise electric cars in the period up to then to actually get people to shift over. But in the end, you've got to say, if we said there is a date, by that date, we're going to stop having petrol cars and diesel cars in big cities. You'll get there.
Michelle,
I've got two questions. Firstly, what are they planning to do with the money that they're going to charge me?
No idea. It'll go straight into coffers. To my knowledge, it's not being ring-fenced.
Yes. So this is the thing. I don't have a car at the moment, but my car was diesel, and the one that I'm getting next is diesel. But maybe not.
You're buying a diesel.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Get something off the price.
My question is, because this is where I struggle with this a little bit, because to get into London, for example, you already have to pay a tenner as a congestion charge, or whatever it is.
It's 12 now.
12 to get in.
Yeah.
And then you have to pay extortionate parking to get to even leave your car there and all the rest of it. So what I want to understand is by slapping on an extra tenner. No, I'm talking for anyone that's going to get charged, not just me. Yeah. So for anyone that's going to get charged, let's just say an extra tenner or 20 quid, what are you doing with that money in order to work to prevent toxic air impact? So, for example, my second point was, I've seen in some countries, and don't ask me where, I can't remember, where they create like living roads. So they've put all these special plants along the sides of the roads because these plants are doing stuff to absorb these poisonous gases. So my point is, if you're going to come to me with a policy where you're going to tell me you're going to take a tenner off me, A, please tell me what you're going to do with that tenner in terms of fighting the problem, and B, please also tell me what other things that you're planning to do, such as those living walls.
Greg,
but the aim...
You're a businessman, aren't you? Instead of getting rid of these millions and millions of diesel cars. I've got one, you've got one, you've got one, or whatever. Yeah. Why can't they do something? We can put a man on the moon. Why can't you invent a particle filter that can make the diesel cars less polluting and less toxic?
I should tell you, I got grade 9 chemistry when I was doing this. I think I will be the last person to know how you could do it.
When they were recommending diesel, they thought they would have the technology to do
always
that.
Gets clogged up, and don't make any rude jokes.
No.
Otherwise, I'm going to scrap you.
They produce less carbon. Currently, they produce less carbon monoxide, but they're putting out other things that, as Mayor Khan says, are completely dead. But it's an interesting point. Sorry, address it again to Greg. Why can't someone develop a better engine or something like that?
Why can't they?
Pass. I don't know.
And also the other thing that worries me about the diesel scrappage scheme, again, I'm not talking about you, Nick, there are millions and millions of cars on the roads anyway. I think Greg's idea is much better. We actually need to reduce the numbers of emitting cars on the roads.
Greg's back in his
utopian, having said that, I would
world.
swap my 2006 diesel Volvo for a Tesla. So if anyone going to make me this on,
I drove a Tesla the other day for the first time. These £100,000 cars. Yeah. It is sensational.
There we go. Well, that's the advert done.
It is sensational.
All right. Well, this series has celebrated lots of people saying it like it is. Given an athlete a Straight Runner Award. Last week, we honoured a newspaper. So this week, our award goes to Canada's Foreign Minister, Chrystia Freeland, for her performance at the Syria Summit in Brussels. Now, that's her in the maroon dress, ready for the family photo. Who's not ready is, our Foreign Secretary, one Boris Johnson, who squeezes in at the last minute, almost sending Miss Freeland flying. Who knew Boris had such broad shoulders? Let's take another look at it. So, she gamely stands her ground, determined not to give way. Well done, Chrystia Freeland. You're our straight stander of the week. Quite a presence to suddenly arrive, would you agree? Boris coming in.
I'm sure Boris was in hair and makeup, obviously, and taking his time getting his hair rumpled.
That's definitely the standing equivalent of the man spread,
Well, that's it from us for this week, and indeed this season of The Pledge. We're taking a week break for Easter. Yes, Easter. But we'll be back on the 20th of April. I'll see you then.